Okay. I love the simple framework of this. Grow up, wake up, clean up, show up. I love the fact that the word up is directional.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a deliverable that you're looking for, an outcome. It's a direction you're going to. I'm going to wake up. I'm going up in my waking ability or whatever. That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the words grow, wake, clean, and show. I think these are very basic, simple words. Most people have a sense of what they mean, but let's just give, I think in this episode, we want to kind of give an index. We'll go into these deeper in the next few series, throughout the series. But right now, so first of all, how is this in a meta way or like in an overarching way? How are we attuning to this? Like, what's the learning we take from this in a real applicable way? Like, why are we even, let's just talk about the why for a second. What does this do for us? Why?
And is it linear?
Yeah. And so that pendulum swing idea is interesting to think about because that's the spiral part of it there's forward, but then we kind of oscillate back and forth and we have these fits and starts and sometimes we drop back a little bit. You know, you have this really great podcast episode about spiral dynamics in what's the word you use to talk about like kind of the spectrum of where you are. It's like so when you're talking about spiral dynamics, you have this like center of gravity at a level of development. And sometimes depending on your life circumstances, just loosely as an example, you can kind of drop back a little bit, or sometimes you go forward a little bit. If you have like kind of a peak experience and you're in like a really great flow state, you can sort of jump into the next level a little bit. So it's not quite linear in terms of you're always going forward, but there is this kind of slow gravitational force based on our life circumstances that tend to pull us forward. And how you're tracking that depends on the model you're thinking about and stuff like that. Yeah. So with what you were asking, Joel, I think there's this really great quote that I pulled from Ken Wilber that might help us transition to what we're talking about. And he says that growing up, waking up, cleaning up, and showing up are these things that we often talk about in his integral world called the 4 ups. The first 3 all have to do with our inner work, the often grueling personal work we do within our consciousness and closest relationships. But the 4th, showing up, which is where we'll land on, is where the fruits of our labor truly begin to ripen, where all of our accumulated knowledge, personal growth, spiritual practice, and shadow work become a limitless source of strength, presence, and wisdom, allowing us to engage the many dimensions and challenges of our world in a far more meaningful and impactful way. From becoming a parent to becoming a better leader to becoming a better citizen of the world. After all, if our practice does not help us show up more fully in the world, if it does not compel us to enact real change within each of our own spheres of influence, if it does not equip us to directly confront the many terrors and tragedies of our collective unfolding with fearless compassion and skillful action, then what's the point? If the sum total of our practice cannot benefit the world around us, exactly what or whom are we practicing for?
By the way, we are starting something very new here at Personality Hacker. Now, you might be listening to this years from now, and so it's something that's gone on for a while, but as of the time of this recording, it's fairly new. We're starting up an experience of our podcast live once a week online in a virtual format. So what we're doing is we're gathering a group of like minds to come together once a week to watch this podcast together. And then right afterward, we have a membership program where people can come. It's called a personality quest. And we talk about the podcast right afterward. We unpack the learning from it, how we can apply it to our lives. And then we give the entire group of people that have gathered an assignment or a challenge for that week, some journal prompts and some reflection, but also a challenge that week to go test out in their real life, to go explore in the world. All of us are going to do the same challenge that week. And we come back the following week, we talk about it, unpack it, and we get the learning from it. And every week getting together to do this, we've already been doing a few weeks. It's been fantastic. I've loved doing it. It's awesome to see people come and gather live to watch the podcast, talk about it, and go do challenges in their own lives. You should be a part of this. If you're listening or you're watching, we want you to be part of it. Currently, we're doing it on Sundays. You can find out more information and be part of Personality Quest if you come over to personalityhacker.com/quest. And you can learn all about the quests and what we're doing there and get yourself involved, because I think you're going to love this experience, especially if you've loved the podcast and you love personality types and personal growth and the intersection of those two things. It's one of the things that I am super excited about going forward with. So, and there's going to be some live elements to that. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we've got planned around this. But right now we're just starting with these weekly gatherings, and I'd love for you to be involved.
To that end, that made me think also that one of the big things that we can tend to fixate on is one side or the other, this inner world aspect or outer world aspect. It's like, like you were saying before, it's like, if I save the world, I'll be better. If I have the house and all these cars, then I will be better. If I become a better moral person and I contribute to the church, I'm going to be a better person. You know, there's these often external markers of how I'm going to be a better person and how I'm going to contribute to my life. But there's this wonderful frame that Oranio Pius mentioned once in some of the work we had done with him in the past, that he said that we have often touch points with up to 90,000 people in our lives. Like, we have this vast network of connections of influence than we realize. And often we're always focusing on like, how do I make the world better? How do I make you better? How do I make that person better? How do I make that person stop that behavior? When really it's like learning to develop a calmer nervous system. It's better. It's like, how do we find a way to show up in service and joy? How do we show up as a demonstration of calm, focus, work, presence, exuberance, persona, contribution, all of these ideas? And my hope is that not only through this series, but through the work that you do with us or do wherever you end up going to do some of this work, that you start to transition into a showing up, not just telling everyone how they should be or telling yourself how you're supposed to be or should be, but like you're just honestly just doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because some of those markers, I understand the psychology behind that, because when a system is running well, then there's going to be certain emergence.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get really hyper focused on what those emergents can be from a properly running system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll know, like we were talking about before, arrived. I'll know I have arrived when I have these markers. I'll know that I'm successful when I have these markers.
Yeah.
And so it's understandable that people would hyper focus on the marker. The challenge is that some really great, healthy systems running can have different emergence than the one we expect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when individuality gets infused into it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I could have an equally healthy, thriving system as somebody else who has some of the markers you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
but my emergent is slightly different.
Right.
And so going back and looking at the system itself, that's the quote unquote, the inner work, is
Mm-hmm.
making sure that the system is running well and not getting too attached on what the emergent is supposed to be.
Well, and inherently an emergent is not usually predictable.
Yeah.
There's a degree of there's a degree of faith to it. All you can really do is, like you're saying, kind of like tweak the system and update the system of your system, not necessarily the external systems. Though
Mm-hmm.
if you have an influence on some things, sure. But as an individual person, usually what we have control over is the actual literal systems in our body or
Mm-hmm.
the mechanisms that we're actually directly connected to actually contribute. So there's a degree of faith here that the emergent that you'll kind of end up in, the role or purpose of your life or your unique self, will emerge as a result of doing all of this work. It might not necessarily be what you think you'll ultimately become.